Hello, BookTube, and I'm here to do a tag for Tag Tuesday. I'm recording it earlier, but I was tagged by Aaron Facer on his original tag, the Western Canon book tag. And he says in this tag, you can choose 20 books to represent your reading of Western literature. You can include books from any period or genre, and you can define Western literature as you will. Also, please feel free to choose a different number of books if you feel like 20 is too little or too few. I'll stick to 20, and I think, yeah, all are fiction, so I'm going to stick. Well, no, not all fiction. Okay, but I'm not. I didn't pull out any poetry for this. I could, but I've decided not to. There are two books that are well, no, three or so, I guess. Four. Sorry, I'm just looking here. Five that are nonfiction off the 20. So a quarter, 25% is nonfiction. Now, there's three prompts. It says, if you choose 20 books to represent your reading of Western literature, how would you choose them and what would you look for? Well, like he says, how you define it, that is an interesting thing because I had a discussion with another booktuber just a few days ago, recording a Desert Island Books, and we were talking about the so-called Western canon, and like the question came up, like, is Greek, ancient Greek, really part of the Western canon? But then why isn't Middle Eastern stuff, Near Eastern material not part of the Western canon? Because in many ways the Greek stuff, and I think rightly so, is very influenced or was influenced by the Middle East. So, but I will go by tradition and include the Greeks and the Romans as part of the Western canon. Now, as I say, I've only chosen 20, and it's sort of representational, I think, of the areas that I've read, but not really representational of what there is out there, because there are clear blind spots in this, that I've only read a book here or there from this country or this area. And I don't know why that is. Well, I sort of was thinking, because when I did a lot of my reading, I was in my 20s, and there was no internet. I did not know anybody that read this kind of material to discuss with. I did go to the library a little bit, but the libraries that were nearby me were actually a bit limited in non sort of traditional materials. So what I mostly did was I went to bookshops and book sales and just picked up stuff and looked at it, and then, but because of that, I was confined a lot to, like, the Penguin, Oxford, the within a box, let's just say. So, and I did discover other stuff from that, outside of that. And then when I went to university, I've read a lot of ancient Egyptian material, Sumerian, Babylonian, Ugaritic. The list goes on, of a lot of Near Eastern material, and Eastern a little bit. But for the Western part, there are gaps, and I'm not sure whether I should. Uh, Yeah, I'll say it here because, well, no, I'll because like in part three, I list the books that I've chosen, the 20 books. So I'll get to that, why I think I am lacking in certain areas. So, but that's how I did it. I chose stuff that I've either reread recently, or am thinking of rereading, and stuff that's been on sort of my mind a little bit, and it's by no means doesn't it's not a complete list of everything I've read, like, not even close to it. But as I say, when I get to that in the areas, because I've got it sort of split up into areas, or in my mind areas, and then I'll say where I think I'm lacking in these things. So number two is after choosing your books. Oh well, here it is. Yeah, what blind spots have you noticed? Okay, sorry, I didn't. Anyway, the blind spots. Okay, now if I say Russia, Russian literature is part of the Western canon, I have been lacking. There's blind spots there. There's not too much. Um, there is blind spots for a lot of Italian. I've read a bit, the usual suspects, Ariosto, Dante, the Decameron. That was a recent reread for me. Spain is another one that is, that area, Spain and Portugal, because maybe a handful if I really, really think of it. But, I've just reread Don Quixote, and I really love it, but there's more material out there that I don't know about. Um, and just name any other country in Western Europe that has a tradition of writing, which they all do, and I'm lacking in a lot of that. To be honest, like I've read little bits and pieces of things when I got my hands on them, but when I stopped reading sort of that material, when I say stop, I went on to university, and for the last 30 years since I started university, or 35 years, I've read sporadically on that kind of material, and it's only in the past decade, probably 15, well, 5 to 10 years, that I've gone back to some of that material and exploring new material in those areas. So yes, there's a lot of blind spots there, and and I look at my list. Um, it's, well, we'll get to the list, and you'll just see it is sort of glaring for the areas, and I guess as the usual thing is today for gender, and it's mainly because when I was reading this, I had no access to this material, so or other material other than this stuff. So it wasn't a conscious. It was not a conscious thing. It's like if you don't see it, you don't know it. You can't know what you're missing. So number three is, what 20 books would you choose to represent your reading of Western literature? So I chose France, and I just did a smattering of things, sort of through periods to sort of be representative. And I've read a lot of French literature, 19th century French literature and before, and a little bit in the 20th century. But that's another sort of area. If you want to call the canon into the 20th century, that's a bit of a blind spot there for France. But I would say Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, so going up into the 19th century. And I have to get Balzac in there, also 19th century. And I chose Lost Illusions. I've read probably 30 or so of Balzac's novels. But and I could add a lot more in here. Emile Zola, and it could just go on. But these are ones that are in my mind, I suppose. And then going into the 20th century is Remembrance of Things Past, or whatever you decide to call it, by Proust. Then we go to England, and I sort of gave up at a time reading sort of 19th century English writing for the most part, and then that's where I went to France, and I concentrated there. But for England, but there is lots that I do. There's the ancient stuff, like I could have put down Chaucer, I could have put down Shakespeare and all this kind of stuff, but the ones that, again, these are some ones that come to mind, or I've just reread, or thinking of rereading them. And we got Humphrey Clinker by Tobias Smollett. Could be anything by Tobias Smollett, but I chose Humphrey Clinker for some reason. Charles Dickens, and the one I've chosen is Bleak House because I've just reread that this year. And George Orwell for 20th Century, Down and Out in Paris and London, because I will be rereading that shortly. And next year I'll be rereading C.P. Snow's Strangers and Brothers. So there's two, one sort of 18th century, one 19th century, and two 20th centuries there. Then we got Don Quixote for Cervantes. And again, this is where, Spain, I would love to read a lot more. I've got a Southey's, I think it is, day book. It's like 4 volumes, I think. And he's quotes so much Spanish literature that I've sat there when I first got it and for hours and just sort of leafing through and reading bits. And I go, I never heard of this stuff. I just never ever heard of it. I never was exposed to it. And that's why I bought this. And then it got sort of, um, in my piles here, and then I've sorted those and I've moved those. And again, once I dug them out, I sat there and perused through it for quite a while. And I will continue to do that. And I have no doubt that once I get everything shelved up again and I have access to that, I will occasionally pull something out and try to track something down to read. Now we go to the ancient world of Greece and Rome. The two that come right out, jumps out at me, is the Histories by Herodotus and the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. Those are two I've read extensively. I've read a lot of Greek and Roman. I wouldn't say I've read everything in every scrap there is, but I've read every single thing that I could get my hand on when I was in sort of high school, for about a 3-year period or more. For Latin or Roman, it's the Murder Trials by Cicero. I could have chose anything, but the Murder Trials came to mind. And the letters of Pliny the Younger, but it could be Pliny the Elder as well. And there's lots more, but as I say, I'm trying to keep this down to 20. And these are ones that are on my mind that I wouldn't mind, revisiting. Now we go to Russia and Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Um, and that one is, I've read that and one other by him, but you see, there's a lot more to be read. And Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak, because I've just, again, that came to mind because I've got a paperback here that came to light. And I want to reread The Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And then we go to the New World. And again, this is just very, not even representative, but it just a smattering. Look Homeward, Angel, I think it was just, or Look Homeward by Thomas Wolfe. Like the corpus of short stories or corpus of Edgar Allan Poe. It's kind of hard to pick one thing. Turn of the Screw by Henry James. And again, that's just one because that again has come to mind. And Henry James, I could have picked anything because everything that I'm reading of him now just is fabulous. I've sort of rediscovered him. I left him behind so long ago, not out of because I didn't like him. It just, I never really looked at him much. I didn't have a like or dislike for him, other than I lumped him in with sort of Victorian sort of literature. And in this one too, I could add Anthony Trollope, and then that was somebody else I lumped in, but I never really, read anything more. But I do have Charles Dickens because I have always liked Charles Dickens, and that was one that I continued to read. And then for 20th century, well, Henry James is more or less 20th century. Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck is fabulous. So yeah, that's, and it was an interesting thing. It made me realize that there are areas that I have pretty good strengths in, but still there was a lot more. Like there's so much French literature more that I would love to read that I haven't read, and also reread. See, this is the thing. I'm in a reread period at the moment. So yeah, so it gave me a lot to think about. And Aaron basically tagged everybody and their neighbor. So I won't tag anybody for this. I'm going to cop out as usual, and I won't tag anybody. But yeah, that's the Western Canon book tag. Thank you, BookTube.